even if you don't get to that goal, even if you don't reach the point where your assets are paying you enough to cover your living costs, you're still going to be in a much better financial position than if you didn't. Your life will be easier and less stressful. So why wouldn't you take the shot?
Hello and welcome to Graduate Theory. Today's guest is a financial educator, founder, speaker, and chemical engineer. She graduated as valedictorian from chemical engineering before starting work in the mines. And since then, she's accomplished many things, including becoming financially free, giving a TEDx talk, and writing a book called Money School, and founding a company by the same name. Please welcome to the show the financial guru, Lacey Filipich.
Hi, Jones. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on the show, and I'm excited to talk about everything to do with finance and kind of your own financial journey. Perhaps we can sort of wind back the clock to the start of this journey that you've been on, and I wonder if there was a moment when you first started taking your finances a little bit more seriously and kind of realizing the potential that was there.
Yeah, I'm going to sound really strange right now and say it was when I was 10. So that's quite young. But that's when I first learned about compound interest. And I learned that money makes more money when it's in the bank. My mum had told me it breeds like rabbits. And my eyes just lit up. And from that moment, I started saving half of every dollar I've ever earned. So that's nearly 30 years ago now. So that'll date me. But yeah, that's a long time to be saving. But I put that as the start of when I started getting interested in money and realizing that money could be wasted or used sensibly for a specific purpose. And so I thought, well, I'm going to spend the half with impunity on what I want to spend it on, and the other half I'm going to save and make the most of it.
Great, yeah, it's a pretty young age to get exposed to like the idea of saving and things like that. So it's certainly, it's like that compound interest idea. It helps to get started early, and getting started that young is is really cool, really cool. And I want to ask it again a bit more because you have been on this huge financial journey. And so when was the moment then from you've gone from just saving and then to realizing, hey, I can actually put my assets and my savings to work, and I can actually kind of set up a life for myself where perhaps I don't have to work if I don't want to. I mean, what was that kind of the transition like there?
Well, this is a really interesting point. So the idea of becoming financially independent, so that's like the goal that a lot of people aim for, which is where your assets, so you might have properties that pay rent or shares that pay dividend or even cash in the bank that pays interest. You might have bonds that pay a coupon. All those things are what make you financially independent. So all of a sudden you make enough money from those assets and you don't have to work anymore. I didn't actually do anything that got me to financial independence thinking about that goal, which sounds ridiculous, right? I just magically ended up there. That's not quite the case. It wasn't magic. It wasn't an accident. But I didn't ever have that in mind as my objective, to be able to choose not to work while I was doing it. So I think that's really important for people to understand. It's great if you have got that goal, but it's not why I did it. The reason I did it was because I wanted to make the most of my money. And I'm an engineer, chemical engineer, and engineers hate waste. Waste is our enemy. I just didn't want to see any of that money get frittered away. So, of course, I'd learned about compound interest when I was young. I had money in the bank. And remember, this is back in the 90s when interest rates on savings were hitting 9 and 10%, not compared to the couple of percent you get right now. So you got really quick growth compared to what you've got right now. So I'd seen that happening. And my mum in my teens had helped me put some of that money instead into a mutual fund, which got better return than interest. So I was aware that you could invest, but I hadn't been very active. You just stick money in a mutual fund and it pays results, and then they take a fee. What had happened was when I was about 17, we went to a seminar and it was given for free at our local pub. And usually when you go to these seminars, they're sales pitches, but somehow we were just super lucky, my mum and I. We went to this seminar and this guy was just talking about how to buy property, and his general principle, which has stuck with me to this day, is buy quality, undervalued properties. That's what you're looking for. Good quality, paying less than their market price. And that was when I was 17. So we started learning about that. My mum gave me the Rich Dad Poor Dad book, which I love that book. Not a massive Kiyosaki fan. He's not my favorite person in the world. Would not recommend you go out and follow his advice everywhere. But that book's really good. that book, the principles in it and the way he explains the story, which apparently he's made up, very effective way to learn. So that had all happened in my, as I was leaving school. And then when I was 19, I had quite a whack of savings, and my mum, I was telling her that I was going to go buy a nice car because all my friends, I don't know if uni students are still the same. I'm assuming they are. We all drove terribly old, ugly, very cheap cars. That was pretty much the priority. If you spent more than $1,500 on a car, that was an expensive car. And I was going to go out and buy something flash, and I said to my mum, hey, look, I'm going to go buy a car. And my mum said, that could be a deposit on a property. And I went, oh my gosh. And that's when I started, I guess, thinking back to all that stuff I'd been learning over the last couple of years about how property investing worked and how you used leverage. And leverage is debt, right? You're borrowing money. Pretty risky decision at 19 years old. Now that I look back at it, I go, wow, that was gutsy. It's kind of one of those things that you do when you're naive that you might not do if you had too much information. But the fact that I did it at the time that I did it, it was 2001 in Brisbane. It was just before we had a property boom. I bought a little property, a little 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment. It was hideous, so ugly. Oh my God, brown everything, brown carpet, brown brick walls, brown ceiling. I cried when I got the keys and I got inside and I was like, wow, this is disgusting. And 50 square meters, tiny, right? But it was the first property I bought and I just got in before this boom. So the property price doubled in 2 years. Just luck, that timing. If I'd waited 2 years till I had finished university and I had a steady job, because of course at the time I was only working, during the week about 12 hours a week and working about 30 hours to 40 hours a week on the holidays at uni. But I was getting paid reasonably well back then. You got paid about $800 a week as a student engineer. That was pretty good, 20 years ago. And that was the decision I made, and that was the beginning. And then because I had seen that experience, I was by 21, my property price had doubled, so my equity had doubled. And I hadn't taken out a very big mortgage, comparatively speaking, because I had a great big deposit. And I was paying the mortgage down, and I was going, wow, so this is how it works. So that was really, I think, the point at which I realized I could do more with my money than just leave it in the bank and earn interest.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's a really cool story, and I guess a little bit of luck involved there, but really cool, and certainly shows the power that you can do, things you can do with your money. Because especially at the moment, like putting it, and perhaps when you were looking at stuff too, the the interest rates at the bank, aren't the best. So certainly it's important to look at other avenues and places to put your money, so that it's not just getting the 0.005 or whatever the interest rate is at the moment.
It's hard. I don't think interest rates are going to go up, but it's this awful thing because you'll never know what's going to happen when you do the thing. I could only look back in retrospect and go, wow, my timing was great. The market could have stayed low for another 2 years and I might not have built that equity. It could have gone backwards as property does do. I was very lucky, but what luck actually ends up being is circumstance plus being prepared. So you can't control the circumstances in a lot of ways. We can't control the life we're born into. We can't control our starting point. We can't control what the economy is going to do, whether there's going to be a war or a pandemic. We can't control all of these things. But you can be prepared to grab an opportunity when it comes along. If you wait till the opportunity is there and you're not prepared, it's much harder than to get ready in time before the opportunity passes. That's, I guess, what I've learned in retrospect. The fact that I was prepared and able at that time to buy meant that I could do it. And it was still a risky decision. It's not necessarily something that every university student should consider doing. There's certainly a lot of risk involved with it. But it paid off and I was lucky. And so those two things together are what adds up to getting ahead. Could have gone the other way, but it's really important that you make sure you're prepared, because if you can be prepared, then maybe the opportunity won't come along, and that's okay. But if the opportunity does come along, then you're ready to jump on it and you don't lose the time that you would learn all those new things about to be able to be ready, and then the opportunity's gone. So that's probably the learning I've had from that.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's really cool, and that's pretty good advice, definitely. I want to ask too about you were working full time for a while, and then I know you mentioned this in your TED talk, right? You're working for a bit, you're kind of getting a little bit burnt out from working so much, and then you kind of went on this big trip, trying to almost escape work for a little while. Talk to me about that and kind of the reasons why you went, and what you learnt, and what kind of reflecting on while you were away, and how that impacted you when you were coming back.
Yeah. So I think everybody has a moment at some point in their life when they realize they're not invincible anymore. A lot of your listeners probably haven't had that moment. And maybe those listeners are saying it'll never happen to me, which is normal, by the way. That's human nature to think it won't happen to me. But at some point in your life, you'll have this moment of crisis where you go, wow, I could die, or I could get really sick, or, I don't have complete control over my body's response. And I think having that happen to me in my 20s, that's quite young to have that moment. And a lot of people don't have it till they're later in life. Some people have it earlier. Some people are confronted by it, in their youth. But for me, it came in my 20s. And what had happened was I had been working too hard, which sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Like I'm completely the opposite now. But at the time, I was doing a job that was really, really intense. It's called change management as a broad brush sort of thing, but my job was basically to go to mine sites and help them make more money more money without spending money. So they had to make more tons, they had to produce more. It's optimization, business improvement, all that kind of stuff. But when you're dealing with a workforce that might have been there for 30 or 40 years, it takes almost like a force of personality to convince them to change. Like the big work is in sitting down with people and persuading them to do something that they've done the same for 30 or 40 years to do it differently. And it's hard and it takes a long time. And like when I say a force of personality, you really do need it. You need charisma, you need persistence, you need to be so annoying, which turns out something I'm very good at. Anyway, so I had done really well in this role and I was getting promoted, and they had decided to make me an internal consultant because, of course, you pay a lot of money for consultants that do that. And the mining company I worked for wanted to have an in-house team, and I was the guinea pig. So they started sending me to different sites. So you're going to all these sites that are like really intense. It's really full on work. And I just didn't have a holiday for about 18 months. And at about a year in, I was like, I'm really tired to my boss. I'm like, I think I need to have a break. And my boss said to me, well, we're doing this 6-month turnaround. You can't have a break now. Sorry. You've got to keep pushing through. So I sort of knew I was feeling tired. And I was like, oh, well, I better do it. And at this stage, I didn't really understand. I guess I was still coming to terms with what it's like being an employee in a big company, and how the company's needs come before yours in some cases. Now, my boss had a very good explanation. I know your listeners won't be able to see this, but it's, imagine two hands crossing fingers and joining together, that you have to go hand in hand. The employee's needs and the boss's needs, the boss representing the company, have to go hand in hand. But in this case, my needs couldn't be met. And as a result, I got really sick. I spent 5 weeks in bed, which at like 26 years old is quite shocking. And it was because I got a virus, and so unavoidable. It's not like I got chronic fatigue or anything, but the virus really hit me for 6 because I was so run down, because I hadn't been eating well, I hadn't been exercising, I was all work, 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 work. And that just really made me think, oh my gosh, like 4 weeks of lying in bed surrounded by tissues, I was lying there going, am I ever getting out of bed again? Am I ever, is my life ever going to be normal again? And that was enough for me to go, oh my gosh, I don't really want to do this. So yeah, I did run away. Came back to work for a few weeks when I was better to tidy up and hand over. And then I went for 3 months to South America with my partner, who's now my husband. And that was my moment of trying to get better and recuperate. And I spent a lot of time thinking. And it was during that trip that I was like, this is stupid. Why would I work myself to death? Why am I like, yeah, they'll pay me a good wicket, but life's too important for that. So that's where I started thinking about, I don't really want to slug my guts out. And look, I was on they talk about the high performer program. I was on the high performer program. I was earmarked to be a vice president within 5 to 7 years. So, you want to hit these targets, and they motivate you mostly through money, effectively. And I was like, this is not worth it. It's not worth it. And I looked around at all the people who'd reached general manager level and vice president level, and I was like, this is about time served. They're the last people standing. Other people tapped out and went, I can't keep up. Much more than your capability. So I sound very cynical, I know. but that's what happened to me. And there's lots of people who can do that well. There's lots of people who can be promoted or do high stress work, and they can manage their personal life. I'm just not like that. I'm a campaign worker. When I work intensely and I'm very focused. and then I have to stop and take a break. And that's what I've learned about myself. I can do the intense work for a period of time, but I have to allow recuperation time. And Monday to Friday, 48 weeks a year, ain't going to accommodate that. So I do not suit working as an employee anymore. So it was a big thing to realize when I was in my 20s.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. Yeah, we had. I know that you know Mel as well, and she had a similar story recently. Where she said like a similar thing. She was just working so much, and it just just everything kind of fell down after that, and she had to kind of put things back together. But yeah, I think that's really important to know, and important for people to realize that you got to sort of pay attention to what's going on as well. It's fortunate in some ways that you got sick and were able to sort of realize what was going on. You
Yeah.
know,
There's a silver lining for every cloud, right? At the time, it was
yeah.
pretty like, oh my gosh, my career plan to get to CEO by the time I'm 40 just disappeared. I don't want to do that anymore. What am I going to do? So it felt awful, but you're right. It's pivotal, and it does open so many other options that I hadn't even considered. And when I look back now, and I think I could have been slogging my guts out, putting my kids in childcare from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. What would be the point? Why bother? Don't have them if you're going to do that. So I know I sound very judgy there. There are people who that works for and they want to do that, but that's not what I want. I want to be at home with the kids. I want to see them grow up. I want them to know me. And I want more satisfaction than just knowing that I helped some shareholders get an extra 2 or 3 cents on a dividend.
Yeah. No, I think that's really, really cool and important to, yeah, really cool. And because, so how did you approach that then? You've gone from working a lot, you realize you want to change things. Like, what does that look like now? Is it like, did you change jobs at that point, or how did you kind of go about restructuring things so that you could live life the way that you sort of wanted to?
Yeah. This is a really important, I think, thing that people need to realize, and it's this concept of mini retirements. That really changed everything for me. I read The 4 Hour Work Week. A friend heard about me going, oh my gosh, life crisis, what do I do? And said, you need to read The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. Now, the 4 Hour Work Week is, the whole premise is design a business that you work on 4 hours once a week so you can live in anywhere in the world, and it becomes like, he calls it a muse. It's just a cash flow for you. And the idea is then that you can take these chunks of time off working. If you set the business up right, you can take 3, 6, 12 months off, and you do that when you're young. You don't wait till your 60s, because at the moment we sort of think of our life as divided into 3 segments, right? There's education when you're young, there's working through your 20s to your 60s, and then there's retirement, which is you playing golf or whatever it is you're going to do, grey nomad, travel the world, look after the grandkids, whatever's your priority when you finally start working. So there's this 40 years where you're going to get 4 weeks a year of leave, and you're going to maybe get long service leave if you hang around. Who does that anymore? So you're basically going to be working for 40 years. And when you're not working, when you're on holidays, you're just trying to recover from that working. His idea was, no, have those breaks. Take that, could be 10, 20, 30, 40 years, depending on how healthy and how long you live. Break that up into smaller chunks and take them in your youth. And that was like, oh, that's me. That's what I need to do. I need to work really hard for 6 months and then have 6 months off. That's what I want to do. I want to try that. And so that's what I decided to do. It took me a while to get to that point, by the way. I came back to work for another year and a bit after I finished my holiday around South America. It took me a while to sort of say, oh yeah, no, I really want to do this. But when I did resign, I resigned to take 6 months off to work on a business idea because I was going to create this news. And it was just recuperation, if I'm honest, for me. And it was the beginning, though. I did write and self-publish a children's book called Bunny Money, which is about teaching kids about money, because that was the thing I was like, oh, I really should, work on this area. We can talk a little bit about how I ended up picking that later. But effectively what I ended up doing was spent the next 3 years, I'd work 6 months over winter, and I would have 6 months off over summer. And I did that by, instead of doing my job as an employee, I became a contractor. And it turned out that the company that had trained me while I was an employee had a non-compete policy. So while I was employed, they couldn't make me a job offer. But once I resigned, the next day they called me and were like, hey, would you like to be a consultant for us? So there's things like that you're not aware of that are out there. And so I was able to take these 6-month contracts. Now, because it's intense work and because the contractors get paid a lot more, I ended up making more than my annual salary in 6 months. So that was like I didn't know that was going to happen. but it did.
Yeah.
And my pay went up very quickly. So I was eventually making a lot more than I would have made if I'd stayed in the line by working only 6 months a year, 4 days a week, and then having 6 months off. So did that for 3 years. And in those breaks that I was having mini retirements, we would go and live down near Margaret River, which is south of Perth, and have a great time. Eat well, exercise, sleep in, throw the alarm clock away,
Yeah.
all those wonderful things. And I would work on my idea for money school, which came about because all my friends were going, how come you don't have to work full time anymore, Lacey? Because they were all slugging their guts out. And I said, well, I've been buying properties and paying down the debt, and I'd been investing in shares and earning dividends. And I've been still saving 50% of everything I've earned. So like me taking time off was nothing, like I could have lived for 5 years off my savings alone without the income. And they're all going, how did you do that? And I was like, well, I started saving when I was 10 and started investing when I was 19. Like, what have you been doing? And of course, they all had credit cards that they weren't paying off. And they had car loans for really fancy cars. And I was driving my crappy old car, still safe, but crappy old car. But I didn't have to work. And they were all going, this is not fair. How'd you learn about that? And that's why I started working on money schools, to try and teach people about that. So that all happened as I was starting to, see quite a lot of wealth being developed. And I was still churning my money into that investing. But that was the point at which I was like, hey, there's an alternative and I want it.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, that's really cool. And yeah, a really cool story. Certainly. I wonder, there's a lot of like different things that I want to touch on. And the first is perhaps like someone that wants to start, like, so let's say someone is like 3 years into their career, and they've heard this and they're like, wow, I really want to embark on this journey of taking my financial life a bit more seriously and kind of growing my finances towards the FIRE, sort of movement. I want to kind of be financially sustainable without necessarily having to work or working less or whatever that might be. What would be like the first steps that someone should take to sort of go down that path?
So look, when I talk to people about how do you become financially independent, there are only 3 rules. Only 3 rules, okay? Save, buy assets, avoid bad debt. That's it. So long as you're applying those rules, the percentages don't really matter. How much you save is about what you can afford and your personal circumstances. I could afford to save 50% of everything I earned. Other people can't. Some people can save more. Like if you want to get there really quick, there are people who save over 90% of their income and live on 10% of it, right? So the percentages are kind of irrelevant. The principles are what matter. So long as you save, as long as you take most of those savings, you need to keep some in cash as like a buffer to get you through any emergencies. So long as you take the rest of those savings and buy assets with them, and assets are things that put money in your pocket, as long as you don't get sucked into bad debt. Now, when I talk about bad debt, we're talking about car loans, credit cards, buy now, pay later, pay advances, all those kinds of things. Anything where you are taking money from future you, because future you has to pay it back, but you're not buying an asset with it, that's bad debt. So long as you do those 3 things, you have a very good chance of getting to financial independence. And it's about how aggressively you do those. So if you want to get there quick, save more and invest more. All right. That means you might be sacrificing some quality of life or something that you want to do earlier on. If you don't want to do that sacrifice and you can only save a little bit, then it just takes you a lot longer, but you still get there. And even if you don't get to that goal, even if you don't reach the point where your assets are paying you enough to cover your living costs, you're still going to be in a much better financial position than if you didn't. Your life will be easier and less stressful. So why wouldn't you take the shot? So if you're thinking about it, what you need to think about is how much can you save? And if you can't save anything right now, when do you think you're going to be able to save? Is it when you get your first job out of uni? Is it when you go from being on probate to being permanent? Is it when you get a certain number of clients for your small business as a sole trader? But once you get there, set it up so that you can't stop saving. Make it automatic. Isolate your savings account, have it automated so the transfers happen straight away, get your payroll to pay into that savings account, don't have it connected to any spending, and then make sure you do something with those savings and you will get there. So that's my advice to everyone. And if you can't save right now, which is normal for a student, right? It's normal for students to be on the bones of their bum and struggling and eating baked beans or 2-minute noodles. That's fine. And that happens to everybody. It happens to, I think about my mother, who was a single parent, and there was a good decade in there where she could not save anything. She was too busy making ends meet and trying to support 2 kids on like 30 grand a year. That's okay. All right. That happens to everybody. It's not your fault. It's not a problem. All you need to do is be ready when you finally do find you have extra money. You save it, you don't spend it.
Yeah.
And make sure you start that. The longer you wait to start that, the longer it'll take you to get there.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's good. And I liked what you said there about, you're sort of going to get there eventually if you just save like any amount, but it's just like how serious, like, how much do you want to save and then how quickly do you want to get to that point?
It's just about speed then. It's just about speed. You want to get there quick. Like the people who get there the quickest, like in under 10 years usually, are the people who save, like my saving rate sounds high at 50%. There are people who routinely save 70 to 80% of everything. And they just live super frugally. If that is okay for you and that's how you want to live, go for it. Not my jam. I don't want to give up nice holidays. I want to give up nice food. So you don't have to, but if you really are dedicated and committed and that's what you want to do, then okay, go ahead. It's not a one size fits all answer. It's a choose your own adventure answer. There's just those 3 basic principles you've got to follow.
Yeah, definitely. That's cool. And I want to ask as well. So you like starting your business with Money School and all that kind of stuff. Like, how did you like? There's a fair bit that goes into doing that sort of thing, right? You got to learn like how to market your product correctly. You got to learn how to like write and produce like all the content that's there. Like, there's a heaps of different stuff that sort of goes into that. How did you kind of get started on that journey and kind of learning all those skills that are needed to do that kind of thing?
Yeah, gosh, if I had known then what I know now. Yeah. So I guess first of all, that 4-hour work week was useful in that it talked about things that will suck time in your business and why you need to thoughtfully design your business before you start. So that was an advantage because I think a lot of people build successful businesses and they spend enormous amounts of time on them and they suddenly go, but I can't leave the business because it relies on me. And from the beginning, I wanted to build something that didn't require my time. So that was sort of a guiding principle. And that's why I've never taken on investment and I've never grown the business to have lots of employees because you can't turn it off if that happens, unless you've got a really good general manager that you trust to run it, and then you can walk away. So, and I didn't want to go down that path. So everything I did was about how do I make this business so that I can switch it on and off, so that it can still keep producing value for people while I'm not physically working. And how do I work on that? So that was my guiding principle. Now that works for someone who's a content producer and an educator, which is what I do. I produce educational financial content. Most of it is online and pre-recorded, which I've been doing for years. It's been great the last couple of years because people finally are like, oh yeah, we love this. So there's a lot of that. And I've written a book, obviously, which sells without me now. Like you read the book anytime, but I did the work for it back in 2019 and 2020. So it's almost like having a passive income kind of set up for a business. That's the way I've sort of thought about it. I still exchange my time for money. I still get hired to deliver courses. I get state governments, local councils, employer bodies. I get schools. I get all sorts of people hire me to deliver workshops. And they might be a bit more bespoke. People will want, we want these people to learn about debt, or these ones want to learn about shares, or, can you talk about superannuation for women? Those sorts of things I get asked to do. So that's more time dependent. But you're right. You have to learn how to do everything. Absolutely everything. You have to learn how to be the accountant and the bookkeeper. You have to be the social media marketer. You have to be the person writing the emails and the copywriter and all that stuff if you don't want to build a big team, which I don't want to do. So yeah, I have become a bit of a jack of all trades. But the great thing is there's lots of supportive communities out there where you can join, become a member and get advice. There's lots of online information and short courses you can do. And I actually have learned the most just from copying people who do it well, and I don't mean like I copy and paste their content. I mean, if I get a really good email and I think that's a great email, how have they done that? I'll analyze how they did the spacing, how long the sentences are, where they put the headline, how they chose the headline. And they're never in my industry. There are people who write great emails in my industry, but you can learn just by observing. That's a lot of what I find myself doing, and a lot of Googling. But yeah, I've had 12 years now running my own business. So I do get lots of people ask me, where should I start? That sort of thing. I think starting with the end in mind is really important. The fact that I started my business knowing that I didn't want it to be big, I didn't want to take investment because I don't want a boss, and I want to be able to turn it off, has decided where I've spent my time and where I have learned. Not everyone's going to want a business like that. It just depends on what you want, right? That was a priority for me. But yeah, the resources out there are fantastic, and just observing other businesses is great. You can learn so much by watching who does it well and learning from their methods.
Yeah, no, certainly. That's really cool and interesting to hear that. Yeah, a lot of the things that you learned were from picking up things from other companies. I think that's that's really cool, and often, yeah, I think that's really cool. And I want to continue down this kind of learning theme, and I want to ask about often, when we talk about like financial independence, there's kind of the one side that gets a lot of attention, which is like, okay, I'm going to save like X amount of how much I earn. And then there's the other side, which is maybe less spoken about, which is if I just continue to save the same, but I earn more, then I've also saved more by doing that. So you can either save more or increase your income. They're kind of two ways. And I want to ask yourself, how do you think about that? And then in particular, sort of how did you like go about increasing your income at different stages?
Yeah, right. So I find the side of earning more income vastly more interesting than saving money. Right? I don't have a budget, which sounds amazing for a financial educator. I have 50% of what I've earned in an account, and I spend it with impunity. I'm pretty good at mentally budgeting. I know how much my expenses are, and I'm not like a frivolous spender, so that works for me. But I don't have a detailed line-by-line budget. I couldn't tell you exactly where every dollar goes because I don't have to. So I find that really boring. I really don't get value out of it. I've tried it before. It works for a lot of people, but not for me. I have a lot more fun in how do I make more so I don't care. That's where if I'm going to spend my time, I spend 90% of my time on how do I make more. And I certainly my whole life's been like that. It started when I was a kid, running my own business when I was 10 so that I could make money because I couldn't get a job that paid well because paper rounds were too cheap. Started a business that ended up with 5 of my friends being employees, like that sort of thing. I chose my career at school. So when I was 13 years and 9 months, which is the legal age you could get a tax file number in Queensland at the time, so I could finally be an employee, I started working at before and after school care and vacation care, and I got a coaching qualification in artistic gymnastics. I was the youngest qualified coach in Queensland at the time. They usually make you wait till you're 16, but I got there at 14. And the reason I did that was because you earned like $15 an hour as a coach versus $5.60 an hour at McDonald's at the time. So all my mates were off earning $5.60 an hour at McDonald's, sticking their arms into pickle barrels and coming home stinking. And I was coaching artistic gymnastics, and I would coach 1 hour and a half, and that would be like them working 4 hours. So right from the beginning, I was aware that some jobs were paid more and that you had to look for jobs that were paid more. And that was a priority for me. Part of the reason I chose engineering is it's super well paid. Like it's a really well paid job. I mean, it's not like medicine, but I don't like medicine, and I don't particularly want to work 24 hours in a shift, which is what they expect a lot of doctors and nurses to do. So I wasn't interested in that. But engineering was a really good job prospects at the time. This was like 2000 that I started university, and we were just about to come into a mining boom and oil and gas boom, and jobs are plenty. So the other thing I'd also researched was the fact that engineering was the most common qualification of CEOs in Australia after an MBA. Lots of engineers run big companies, and it's because we're good problem solvers. And I was like, well, CEOs are well paid. I'll be an engineer and then I'll become a CEO. So my whole career strategy, I loved chemical engineering, I loved problem solving, but was very much I'm picking a role that I earn a lot of money in. And that is what I spend so much of my time these days when I go to Women in Technology WA, I'm going to schools. We talk about studying STEM. I say, girls, ladies, everyone present, you make a lot more money in STEM careers than you do in everything else on average. The end. Pick a STEM career, right? Like if you want to be financially independent, pick a job that's paid well. And I understand that there's a lot of people who want to do caring roles, and that's fine. Our society does not pay caring well. If you pick that role, getting a good income will be rare, and you'll have to fight for it. If you're okay with that, that's fine, right? But go in with your eyes open there. So it sounds quite mercenary, and I don't like it. I think we should pay carers more. I think we should be paying all caring roles more. This is a mark of how society values people's time. So that's a big thing. I think people have got to acknowledge if you're going to pick a career that doesn't have good prospects for earning a solid income, and you're picking that at the beginning, I think you're a little bit crazy, because it doesn't matter how much you love it. If you're going to struggle financially, you're going to induce stress on yourself. You're going to have a harder life. Now, so that's pretty depressing. Sorry to ruin everybody's excitement about those who are studying philosophy and we're going to go live on a beach somewhere and relax. Look, go for it if you want to do that, but go in with your eyes wide open. You have to be deliberate about what kind of careers you choose. So I've always been like that. So when I was in engineering, I would ask for a pay rise out of cycle. Every 6 months I went into the office, because you get, pay, you have your review once a year, but I would go in between and be like, hey boss, I've done really well. Here's my list. I would like a pay rise. And so when I finally got promoted to superintendent, they were like, you're already in the pay band of a superintendent. How did you do that? And I'm like, well, I've just been negotiating the whole time. So they're like, we can't even give you a big pay jump. And I was like, no, you still need to pay me more. I'm not going to be a superintendent. No. So they still had to give me a pay rise, but they were like, you are already outside the band. Well, so I should. I'm very, very good at my job, So like, it's that very much self-entitled attitude that really pisses employers off. But if you don't ask, you will not get. It's really important that you're willing to ask. So I'm not rude about it, and I come in with evidence, and I strongly believe I've delivered the value, and that's why I get paid more. I'm not nasty about it, but so you can't go in if you haven't done the job. You've got to be able to perform, but you have to ask. So that I've just kept pursuing. So that was when I was employee, and then of course one day the team I was on, so I was on this team as the internal consultant, and someone was running SAP. SAP is affectionately known as Suffer After Purchase. It's an online system that people use for all of their inventory control and invoice management in big companies. So if you ever come across it, enjoy that. But anyway, one of the guys on site had managed to look up the SAP code for this project that we were on, and it was five consultants working for 7 months, and it was $2.2 million. And he and I sat down and we did the calculation. We were like, so these people, our company, and this is back in like 2007, was paying like between $3,000 and $6,000 per day per consultant. And we went, what? Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. Like that was more than we would earn in weeks, it was, and we were doing the legwork and they were just turning up. So that was us going, holy amazeballs, Batman. And of course, since then I've learned, yes, the type of consulting I do, I'll get charged out at $5,000 a day. That's what a company will pay for me for 6 months every day. So you make a lot more money. So you've got to go looking for those kinds of things, because it's exactly the same skill set. I could be an employee doing that internally for that company and earn a quarter of what they would pay a consultant to do. So I'm a bloody good deal, and I would think I was winning, but actually changing over to consulting. Now, when you go into a big firm, of course, they take a big cut, a very big cut. So, you might be charged out at $5,000, but you might only earn $2,000 and they keep $3,000. So you've got to find the companies that would pay you more. So I went looking for the companies that gave me a bigger cut. And that was it. And that's how I've approached it all. So I sound very financially driven. I am. Not everybody cares about this stuff, but I'm sorry, those of you who say, oh no, just follow your passion and the money will follow, or, oh no, I know it's not a well-paid job, but you should do it anyway. I think you've got to be pragmatic about whether you're going to be able to sustain the lifestyle and the life choices you want. If you can, that's fine. But if you can't, you are setting yourself up for a bit of misery. You need to acknowledge that. And then if you're like me, I'm a complete opposite end of the spectrum. I'm chasing the best pay I can get, and refusing to accept less. And with my particular skill set, I can do that. And I've been very deliberate about building my skills. And that's part of why I became that consultant and focused on those skills, is because I was like, wow, if I can charge that amount of money for my time, who wouldn't? Why would you not pursue that? Especially when I loved it. That was the fortunate thing. I did love that type of work. but you're doing it for money. You may as well make the most you can. So that's a very
Yeah,
long answer, very cynical. There will be a lot of people out there who think that's probably awful, actually, and that's fine. You don't have to do it my way.
mm,
But if you want to make a lot of money quickly when you're young, it's worth thinking seriously about how you're going to do that.
yeah, that's really interesting. And I want to touch on that piece you mentioned about like asking for pay rises like off cycle every 6 months or whatever, because I think that's really important. And because you, like you said, you've got to do it in a certain way. You can't just go there and be like, hi boss man, like please pay me more, and then just, and that's it, like don't say anything else. I think, yeah, could you, I'd love if you could sort of elaborate on what you did there, because you did say, I've got a list of things that I did and kind of how I've sort of outperformed or performed well in kind of what's expected of me. Like how did you sort of typically approach those situations?
Well, so there's, I guess, two things that are really important to think about pay rises. Your greatest opportunity for getting a pay increase is when you start a new role. So when you move from one role to another within a company, but even more so when you move to another company. That is your biggest point of leverage before they get you, because
Mm,
they want you to fill that role, and whatever you start on and the behavior you start on with money will set a precedent for how they'll continue to treat you. But it is the time at which they are least likely to take you for granted. They are most likely to try and entice you. Now, of
mm,
course, I experienced a lot of this during a boom when there was a lot of competition to employ people. It's very different if you're in an industry where you're one of 100 applicants, right?
mm,
Or 1,000 applicants, or in an industry where there's a lot of slack, right? So
mm,
you can't necessarily do this in every role. You've got to be very cognizant of what's happening in your industry. But if you've chosen a career and an industry where you know that currently it's on the seller, the employee side, that
mm,
you can really push. And at that point, you need to think very seriously about how you do it. In my book, there's a script that I got taught. I learned all of this through mentoring. I had consultants and friends at work who taught me this stuff.
mm,
And it was nerve wracking to apply. The first time that I said, that's not enough money and I want 50% more, I like chewed all my nails off, sweated bullets for
mm,
24 hours, but they gave it to me. So it was
mm,
worth doing.
mm.
So
Yeah,
you got to be prepared for that. And if you want to read that script, then borrow the book from the library or whatever and have a look at that script. But I won't share that here because it's won't
yeah.
work if we all do it, and there won't be everybody who goes and reads the book. So for those of you who are excited about that kind of a thing, go and have a look at that. But I think when you're in a role, so you're in your job and you've got the same boss or whatever, the point is, why would they pay you more? Because you're adding more value, and they either don't want to lose you or they want to share profits with you. That's the way to think of it, okay? You cannot get away with this if you're a slacker who doesn't turn up to work or you don't hit your deadlines, okay? So if you're that person, you can try and they might give you more money, but it's not a reasonable ask. It will then look entitled. First of all, you have to do your job well, right? But once you're doing your job well, then ask away and put it in your calendar. I think a chat with your employer where you say, "Oh, can we talk about? I'd like to talk about an out of cycle pay rise, or I'd like to talk about other opportunities to request a pay rise." The thing to remember is you don't have to be all rude and pushy. Make it a chat, and if they just say no straight out of the gate, you can say, "Oh, well, okay, but why? And when might we be able to do that?" It's reasonable to ask for an explanation and to ask for a future date where which you can do that. If they're just like,
Mm,
well, you're never getting a pay rise and don't ask me again, then you got to think seriously about whether your career is going to progress there and whether it's the right fit for you. If, however, they're like, oh, okay, well, tell me why. Why do you think you're worthy of a pay rise, Lacey? Have your evidence. So I would have things that were not about necessarily milestones, though those are important. It was about the actual value I delivered. So, hey, we've seen a 10% increase in our production in my area, which adds up to, and at the time when I was leading one project, it was like $40 million a year. We were helping to add to the bottom line. I'm one of those people. I'm like not the only one, but I was leading the team. It's like, we've added $40 million a year to your bottom line. That's worth something. Like
Mm.
that's I'm doing a really good job. So whatever it is in your job, whether it's client satisfaction, reviews, is it costs, is it production, is it something that you've done, is it an improvement you've delivered, have you made other employees' lives easier, whatever it is, keep notes of that. I had a diary that I just used to write them in and highlight them. And then, so I would come to when I had that discussion and when I had that first sort of like, hey, boss, can we talk about this? And they turned around to me and said, well, tell me why. I'd be like, well, here are the 5 things I've done in the last 6 months that have added a lot of value, that have gone above and beyond. And I think that means I deserve a pay rise. And most of the time they'd go, okay, let's talk about it. And then it's about negotiation. So, they make an offer. You say, oh, that's not enough. And also, the important part of that was about stuff that was lifestyle driven. We think about just the money, but it's not just the money. Sometimes companies can give us things that won't make massive financial impacts on them, so they don't have to find extra money for salaries, but they might be able to give you more flexibility. They might be able to offer you a car. They might be able to, salary sacrifice something. There's lots of things they can do that are not necessarily just financial. So having an idea of what would work for you, it might not just be money, but having that list there so you can talk about it and they can go back. Now, recognizing as well that usually if you're in a big company, there's someone above that has to approve anything out of cycle. It just depends on how high it has to go up. So having patience, being polite, but also following up at agreed times. So if your boss says, look, I can ask, you can say, okay, well, when can I check in with you? Would next Friday be okay for me to check in with you? And they go, oh no, we won't have the meeting till the following Thursday. Great. So can I meet with you the Friday after to find out? Don't just let it go. Don't expect them to do it. Be polite, but be reasonable, and ask for what you want. I think there's nothing to lose, I think, from asking politely. If they go, there's no way, our company is suffering, we've got layoffs coming, something massive's happened, and they go, we just can't. I'm like, okay, that's fine. You've asked. If you don't ask, you'll never know. So you have to ask.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's really good, and I think, yeah, like you said, even if they say no or whatever, you can ask why, and then that will give you like things to do, so that next time it comes around, you can be like, okay, you said to do this, like I've done them. Where are we at now? And then it becomes like what you're also saying around, like, if they're just refusing to sort of budge, then you need to kind of, if that's what you want, then obviously you got to consider, is that somewhere that you see yourself.
Exactly. And timing is important here, right? So I've been in the mining industry since 2000 and I think 1 or 2 was when I did my first vacation work. So I've been through a big boom and then I've been through a down period. Now it's booming again. If you are in the up period, that's when you really want to be trying to do this. Because if I had tried that in like 2015, when everybody was getting laid off, I would have been laughed out of the building. It's you do have to be aware that it's not going to work at every point in your career. And sometimes that'll be because of you, sometimes it'll be because of circumstances beyond your control. So you do have to be aware, but you should always be thinking about it and actively deciding, is this a good time to do it or not? And being willing to ask is a huge thing. Sometimes it'll just be that your boss is too busy. They haven't noticed. It can also be you might have had a look. The other thing that's worth doing is having a look at organisations like Hays, which do HAYS, that do benchmarking and will tell you what typical bands are for your salary. Sometimes they just haven't kept up. They're too busy doing their job. If you go into it assuming that they have good intentions and that if you're not being paid as much as market, it's not because they're deliberately trying to undercut you. It's because they didn't realise the market had moved or they didn't realise that it was important to you. If you approach it with that kind of inquisitiveness and willingness to have a discussion, then you generally won't get a black mark against your name for it. It's only when you walk in all bolshy like, I demand a pay rise today because I'm amazing, and just give it to me and I will not accept anything less. That's when you do create future problems for yourself. You do create a belief within the management of the place where you're working that you're problematic or that you are entitled. So you do have to think very carefully about how you approach it, but it's worth doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really cool, and it's important, right? Because I think you can, if you're not like testing the limit of like how much, how much someone can pay you, then you're leaving money on the table, right? By not doing that.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
should feel a bit uncomfortable. It's honestly, I still, when I do it, get nervous. It's perfectly logical to feel
Mm,
nervous. But I go with the premise of so long as you don't make it impossible for them to say no, so long as you don't give them an ultimatum, do this or
mm.
I'm leaving, then it's a chat, right? It's a negotiation, and you represent you. You've got to get the best for it. So yeah, it is worth trying to overcome those nerves.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's cool. Yeah, I like that a lot. Um, I've got one more question for you today, Lacey, and that's around, obviously graduate theory, career kind of focused podcast. And I want to ask yourself, have there been times, or like if you had to restart your career and kind of wind back to when you were first starting out working, is there anything looking back now that you would approach kind of your career progression and perhaps your finances as well? Is there anything there that you would do differently, knowing what you
Hmm.
know now?
Well, there's one tiny thing in my finances that I didn't understand when I was a graduate. That I know now that I go like, oh shoot, I should have done something about that. When I was working for Western Mining, BHP took us over. That was in my second year as a graduate, and we had been given options with Western Mining, and I didn't understand what options meant, and so I didn't exercise them. And now I know what options mean. I'm like, it's like that 8 grand I could have had. So when something happens financially at work, when they have like a share plan, or they talk about salary sacrificing, or your superannuation matching and stuff like that, if you don't understand, take the time to get the support so you can make a good decision. It's really important that if you get an offer for something from work, that you understand whether it's the right thing for you or not, and that you take the opportunities that you can, because often things like those share plans and those options plans are designed to keep you with the company, but they are a leg up. They are an advantage. But if you just sign without understanding them or ignore them because they're too hard, you can give up a lot. Take the time to learn would be my advice
Mm,
there. Um, the other thing I would encourage people to do, which I hadn't even at the time thought about. Now, you can tell from my discussion that I'm quite a forthright person, and I will fight for what's right for me. And something that
mm,
happened to me when I was in that second year, I was a graduate. I was one of 7 graduates, and 2 of us were female. The other 5 were men. And we were at a site where there was 10 women in total out of 300 employees in Kalgoorlie in Western Australia, right? So that
mm,
was the reality of going into mining in a remote location back then. It's very different now. The next site I went to was 20% female, versus 10 out of 300. So
mm.
it's not normal. But what often happens when you're the only woman on a site, or one of the few, is that you get the women's jobs, which for this particular case was my general manager had lost, in the 18 months I'd been there, he'd lost 5 executive assistants. Now that's not normal. Clearly,
Yeah. Wow.
clearly that was a difficult role, but they
Mm,
couldn't find someone and they really needed someone, so they asked me to fill in. And I had a massive tantrum, like not a, throwing my fist, but I went into my boss's office and was like, you're just asking me to do this because I'm a woman, and I am not happy about that. There are 5 other graduates who are male. Any of them could do that role. Why did you pick me? Because I had a real bee in my bonnet about this. Like, we always give the women the
mm,
job of taking the notes, and they always have to get the friggin' tea and all that stuff. Anyway,
mm,
it was a real thing that I had heard so much about, and I was really sensitive to it. And so I
mm,
overreacted. But I was really like, it was a fair call. My boss said, that is a fair call for you to say that, because this does happen. And he said, look, I promise you, Lacey, that's not the reason you were chosen for this. Can you just take my word from it that you're going to learn something really important, and that it's you want to take this role? And I was like, okay, fine. I really like the boss. He was fantastic,
mm.
JP. And I said, all right, fine, I'll do it. But I'm not happy that you picked me because I'm a girl. And he's like, I'm not picking you because you're a girl. Stop it. I'm like, okay, all right, fine, fine. Anyway, so turns out it was when BHP was looking to buy Western Mining. And I got to be part of the war room that got set up for the merger and acquisition. So I got to be in on the discussions with the executive team and hear how they would pitch the company, how they would persuade another company to buy them. I got to learn about M&A. Now, learning that at 22 is unusual if you're not like in that kind of, like, for a
Mm.
graduate engineer who just come off the furnace in my scruffy, covered in dirt outfit, to be in these meetings
Mm.
listening to this, because I could make graphs, because I could type, and they needed that to hear those conversations that were happening, to understand how the war room would get set up, to learn. That was like some of the most invaluable experience I got in that graduate program. Like, you couldn't have planned it. So my boss
Mm.
had noted that I wanted to be a CEO. He had noted that, because I had told him in interviews, like, where do you want to go eventually? I'm like, well, I'd like to be a CEO eventually, so I want to do management stuff. And he was doing it
Mm.
so that I could get this amazing experience, because I was the graduate who had said I'm interested in that stuff. So he was doing the right thing by me. The fact that I was female, neither here nor there. But if I hadn't listened to him, and I'm just lucky that he didn't go, well, fine, I'll give it to someone else, just to spite me. Someone
Mm.
else. I'm very lucky that he was understanding and saw my
Mm.
response. So that's the difference between having a good boss and a bad boss. So what did I learn out of that? Sometimes you'll think it's because of something that it's not. I had a real bee in my bonnet. Everything I looked at, I was like, they're asking me to do that because I'm a girl. I'm refusing on principle, because
Mm.
I'm a feminist, and thou shalt not make me. It's not always the same. It's just that's your frame of reference. Okay, so you need to be willing to
Mm.
listen when people tell you that's wrong. Sometimes you'll be right. Sometimes you won't be. That's, I think, the most important thing out of that. The second thing that I learned out of this experience is something that's carried me through my whole career is pick your boss wisely. There is no one who will have a bigger impact on how happy you are at work than your boss. The end. 80% of your satisfaction at work, I reckon, comes from whether you have a good boss or a not so good boss. Now, you have to have had not so good bosses to be able to understand what a good boss is, I think. And I've had
Mm.
only a couple in my time. I've been very lucky. I've had fantastic bosses, but I started to get very choosy very early on about who I'd work for that reason. I think there were times when I was younger when I worked for I'm going to be blunt, a bad boss. He was shocking. Should not have been allowed to manage people. Just cookie cutter for everything. No taking into account anyone's personal views, circumstances, or preferences. Just know this is how we do it. You will do it this way. Oh, we never give people that high mark. You only ever get, everybody gets an average. Like that.
Mm. Yeah.
He should not be allowed to manage people.
Mm.
Recognizing that that's not you necessarily. It's not your fault. I had a lot of that. It's sort of like, because when you're new in the workplace, you don't really understand whether that's because you're not meeting expectations or whether you've just been lumped with a bad boss. Sometimes it's a little bit of both. So you got to be honest with yourself. But if you've got a bad boss, just accept that that's a bad boss and they're not right for you. Maybe they're good for other people, but not right for you, and become choosy. So that's, I think, something that I learned based on my youth experience. I've got to be really picky about who I work for, and don't work for assholes. The
Mm.
end.
That's great. Yeah. No, I think that's certainly a good point to finish on. I think there's a lot of great tips that you just gave us there. So I definitely agree with you about the boss situation. Even though I've done 3 different rotations at work and seen 3 different bosses, but it's clear to me and a lot of the other grads that, yeah, definitely your boss, like you said, is a super important part of satisfaction at work. So yeah, I'm glad that you found that as well. Thanks so much for chatting today. If people are listening and they want to find out more about yourself and more about what you do, where should they go?
Well, head to moneyschool.org.au, and if you head there, you'll find everything. I've got lots of free blogs. There's a free course on how to get out of debt, plenty of reading, and you can find out how to get my book there as well. So obviously, I consider the book to be like a financial education. So if this is something that's interesting to you, you want to learn about money, you want to get ahead quick, then the book's a great place to start. And you can grab it from your library, grab it from your favorite bookstore. It's everywhere because I went with Penguin, so they're pretty mainstream. And yeah, moneyschool.org.au is the place to start.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, we'll have that in the show notes if anyone wants to find that down there. But yeah, thanks again, Lacey, for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, James.
Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you want to get my takeaways, the things that I learnt from this episode, please go to graduatetheory.com/subscribe, where you can get my takeaways and all the information about each episode straight to your inbox. Thanks so much for listening again today, and we're looking forward to seeing you next week.